Welcome in, everybody. Today we're going to go over why you have psychology issues in trading and how you can fix them. Because most people just tell you the basic shit like don't oversize, don't take a second trade, don't revenge trade, but they don't actually help you understand why your brain is inclined to do that in the first place. But in order to break those thought loops and those habits, you have to understand why they're happening in the first place. And consider, when you blow your account and you just chalk it down to you having a psychology issue, the reason that you don't change it is because you are okay with it just being a psychology issue and that you don't actually have to understand why it's happening. Just that you know that you need to change it and you know why you need to change it, but you don't know how to change it, so you never will. The most broad example that I can use for psychology issues in this format is a version of two people. One person blows his account and chalks it down to a psychology issue, and then he goes and does it over and over again. And then the other person blows their account, understands that it was a psychology issue, but they don't know how to fix it, so they go and repeat it again as well. The first person is not just lacking knowledge, but they're lacking self-awareness, which means that they probably won't succeed anyway. And the second person is just lacking the knowledge on how to act on it. So if you're the first person, hopefully you just became the second, and if you didn't, you probably should not waste your time watching this video. And if you're the second person, I'm going to hopefully give you the knowledge on how to fix that right now. The fact that you have to check your phone every 30 seconds every time you're in a trade, or the fact that if you lose that trade, you're going to go on a revenge spree and blow the account in 10 trades right after that, shows that you have a real psychological dependence on the outcome of what you're doing, meaning trading genuinely has a grip on you, and that it controls your psyche enough to cause you to have those physical reactions. The truth about that state is that you're not a trader anymore. You cannot consider yourself a trader if that is you. You are a gambler, but you disguise yourself as a trader because it makes you look innocent, and it also shields you from the fact that you have to face what you're really doing. As long as you say that you're just chasing your dreams and that you're just doing it, it kind of looks like bullshit to you, right? Just a cost of doing business. But in reality, there's a sicker reason behind that, and it's that you are addicted to what you're doing. You would be considered somebody who is just vice-driven and looking for another hit of dopamine every time they open their phone. That obviously has to be fixed, or otherwise you will not make it in this business. So, if you are cooked, let's go over how to get uncooked right now. The reason I even chose this topic is because the person that I described just now was me at one point. I knew that I had to change what I was doing, and that I obviously would not make money until I did. I didn't understand the reason that I was inclined to do that stuff more than other people, or at all. And because I didn't understand it, I did not know how I could even start to prevent it from happening, because it seemed like everything I tried just wasn't working. I ultimately came up with a little 3-step protocol, as you could say, but in reality it's more so just a baseline and how you should actually rebirth yourself as a trader, as if these things are just part of being a trader. There's a couple elements that cause that state, and to give you an example, I'm going to use myself again. 2 years ago, I could not handle losing a single trade, at all, not even one. In the back of my mind, it felt like I was owed the outcome, as if the amount of hours that I put in on the charts simply just meant that I should not lose a trade, and if I did, it meant that I could go and get it back because I was that confident in what I was doing. And that's a dual-edged sword, because the truth is that I was good at the time, and I could have been making a good amount of money if I stuck to my rules, but something in the back of my head just would not let me. Every time I got in a trade, it felt like I was constantly fighting my own ego, because I knew I was capable of winning, and I knew I was capable of being profitable if I stuck to my rules, but the aspect of ego that even gave me that ability is also what stripped it from me every chance that it got. And I'm not saying ego in the same way that people blanket their anger issues. I'm talking about real ego of the mind. Something within you that just believes in you more than you do your own physical self. And I think that type of ego is normal for entrepreneurs. I think it's probably what drives them to even become an entrepreneur in the first place. And on top of that, it's probably what causes them to succeed if they do. Most high-level entrepreneurs describe this as something unexplainable and divine, and something that they know is idiotic and seems idiotic to everyone, but for some reason they just believe in it. However, the polarity to that is, just as we know, all forces of nature have an equal and opposite reaction. The negative aspects of that are very capable of offsetting the positive aspects of it. The negative aspect is allowing your ego to push you further away from what all those hours you spent were for. And that is the dumbest fucking thing you can do as a trader, because of how much time it takes to even be able to know the market well enough to trade in the first place. The amount of hours that you spent simply can't be bought back. And if you're letting your own inner self be the reason that those are getting destroyed, then you have to sit back and try to understand the mechanism behind it. And you have to dissolve it. You have to dissolve the ego. And ego dissolution comes from systems, because systems are what limit your ego's access to what you're doing. They limit its access to the outcome. But to even be able to do that, we need to understand it to a degree. So we're going to go over a few things that will help you understand the mechanisms behind the ego that you face. The truth is, trading is a high cortisol activity. And for those that don't know, cortisol is essentially the stress hormone that is released when your body enters fight or flight. Fight or flight in trading amplifies your inner ego. So when this happens, it creates an imbalance of neurochemicals. The most impactful of which for trading are dopamine and GABA. Dopamine is the chemical that most of you are probably most familiar with. And for those that aren't, it's the reward circuit of the brain. So that's where drive, motivation, all that good stuff comes from. When you have increased dopamine, it makes you want to keep doing something because it feels rewarding. And low dopamine makes you not want to do anything at all. As a trader, you don't want either of those. You want to find a middle ground. You want the median of not too much and not too little, just a baseline level of dopamine. But when cortisol is released, your brain chemicals are altered, and when they're altered, that causes your perception of a trade to differentiate. That means the outcome of the trade may all of a sudden mean more to you than it did before you started, and that is obviously very, very bad. Now, the other chemical is GABA, and that is where your rest and calm comes from. It's essentially the chemical release when the body is calm and relaxed. GABA calms your nervous system by slowing overactivity in the brain. That aspect is obviously very important for somebody trying to make a living in a game where being relaxed feels impossible, right? Because it's easy to say detach from the outcome, but when you have a real neurochemical dependence on the outcome, that can't always be done without a system or guardrails in place, because our hunter-gatherer brains were simply just not made to handle the constant loop of cortisol and dopamine you get from watching candles change colors. It fucks with your head. It messes with all of these neurochemicals, which means you must do everything that you can to keep your brain calm, because if the brain is calm, then you can think clearly, and if you can think clearly, then you're probably able to trade at your baseline. So if all of these are a downstream of cortisol release, you need to prevent the release of cortisol, and you need to attempt to have the lowest baseline of cortisol that you can achieve before you get on the charts. And the way that we're going to do that is essentially going to be something called the 30-minute rule. All it means is that the first 30 minutes of your day need to be unpolluted. Not the first hour, not the first 45 minutes, but the first 30 minutes of your day are going to give you the best chance at having a baseline cortisol response before you get on charts. So essentially no screens, no nicotine, no caffeine until 30 minutes after you've already been awake. If you're addicted to caffeine and nicotine, like a significant amount of traders are, just know that both of those raise your cortisol significantly. So you will be much better off if you can delay that process 30 minutes. Because if you're going to be elevated, it's better to be elevated at your baseline than to be elevated at an elevation. Cortisol naturally rises in the morning, so it's attempting to regulate your brain to handle a new day. But with this in mind, you should not be trading within the first 30 minutes of waking up because you are not regulated yet. You have to give yourself time to get your brain flowing and get yourself stabilized at your baseline before you try to throw a nuclear bomb at it. I personally wake up about an hour before market open, and I try to stabilize my body with something. Usually it's electrolytes or just a glass of water, but something that is going to be sensory and acts as a cue that I'm about to start trading. That is how you can start training your brain to actually lock in. Not the TikTok kind of lock in, but the actual kind that alters your brain state. You need a cue, and the purpose of a cue is to tell your brain when to enter a different state of mind. Your cue has to put you in a state of mind that you do not want to be in all day, and that it has to be only for a specific purpose or task. The idea behind the cue is that you're essentially killing the human and waking the machine. It's a sensory trick, so you need to pick something that only happens before you trade or before you get on charts. It can be something physical, a drink, food, song, anything, but it has to be your cue to switch over into that mindset whenever you get on charts. After your cue is initiated, you essentially just need to leave everything outside of trading as a non-factor. Stress, money situations, maybe you're sad because your girl left you, whatever it is, you have to shut that off, because when you're initiating your cue, you're training your brain to forget about all of that. Now, obviously, this is not going to work immediately. You're not going to all of a sudden not be sad anymore because you listen to a song, but over time, it will work, because your brain will understand that when your cue happens, nothing else matters. But again, the cue can only be used for this specific task. So, for example, if your cue is a song, you should aim to only be hearing or listening to that song before you trade, and nowhere else. Otherwise, the transmission you're trying to encode into your brain is going to be much less effective. If you're hearing the thing that is supposed to lock you in while you're on the way to the grocery store, that's obviously not going to have the same effect that it should on you. If you do it properly, you're neurologically training your brain to handle a task better. An example of this is pretty simple, but think about when you turn your PC on, you click the power button, right? And your PC turns on because you click the power button, and it knows to turn itself on whenever the power button is hit. It's programmed to do that whenever it's pressed. You are essentially doing the same thing to your brain. You're trying to program it to perform an action when XYZ happens. The goal is that over time, this hardwiring process is going to tell your brain that when this trigger is active, everything else is offline. All emotions are offline. And that whenever you are cued in, execution is your only priority. And execution is at its best when emotions are offline. Once you're able to actually execute a take profit and, most importantly, a stop loss, all of the work that you've done to earn your execution is going to pay off. So why not put yourself in the best position that you can to be able to execute at your truest form? That's what the cue is for. And that's the first part of this video. The second part is what I would call immersion. It took me a while to understand this because it's not something that you can just see at face value. The idea is that observation equals interference, meaning immersion is the enemy of execution for you right now, because immersion worsens the outcome of execution, and that impacts your thinking. Immersion can be great for analysis and actually learning trading and concepts as a whole, but the truth is you do not need to be immersed for such a simple task like executing the trade, which is just clicking two buttons. Because when you break it down, there are only two parts to execution and then you're finished, right? It's your stop loss and your take profit. And both of those should have been predefined in your analysis. And that is when you are supposed to be immersed. When you become immersed from something that doesn't require much input from you, you overanalyze and you overthink, and you put too much into something that doesn't need that much. Your brain does not need to be operating like it's flowing with nitrous to execute a stop loss and a take profit. that thinking power and that raw input is needed whenever you do your analysis. So if we frame it correctly, the longer that you spend watching a trade play out, the more alpha decay that you're going to experience on your edge over time. Meaning that by simply just watching the trade play out, you are costing yourself money in the long run. Now, the simplest solution to this that anyone could offer you is called set and forget. Right? You set your take profit and your stop loss, and once the trade is live and the stop loss and take profit are set, you just walk away from the chart. But from our perspective as a trader, think about it this way. You analyze the chart and you get a draw on liquidity and you get an invalidation point, and you enter the trade based on something you analyzed in the past, because what you're analyzing has happened in the past and you think it will impact the future, meaning that you do not need to be present on charts for something to happen. If you analyze something in the past, that is the reason you got into the trade in the first place. It doesn't matter what happens after the fact, which is why for most ICT traders, QT traders, most retail traders in general, observation becomes interference. So when you observe a trade, all you're doing is opening yourself and your system up to unnecessary risk exposure. And to call back to the first part of the video, we talked about how trading can cause those neurochemical imbalances just by looking at a chart with money on the line. Your goal is to limit the transmission that causes those chemicals. And what better way to do that than to not being able to fucking see it? So essentially, anytime you're observing a trade in which you analyze in the past and that you still have access to changing the outcome, all you're doing is hurting yourself and the reason that you got in the trade in the first place. Anytime that you observe a trade, you're interfering with the outcome. And if you were confident enough to enter the trade, then you should be confident enough in your stop loss and take profit to where going break even and things like that don't even matter to you because your analysis is correct. Now let's say you're good with this and you can watch a trade without affecting it. The fact that you are still able to is what causes the own form of alpha decay that you're going to experience on your edge, because even if you think that you have it under control and that you think you can't blow up, the simple possibility that you can is what will cause your edge to decay over time. And that decay is completely self-warranted. All you have to do is set your limits and get the fuck off the chart. I mean, turn your monitor off, do whatever you have to do. But if you can't control yourself enough to do that, then you probably should revisit the first half of this video. Until you understand the mechanisms behind what you're doing, you're not going to ever change it. So to wrap things up, we're going to revisit everything we talked about very briefly. The first thing was you need to prepare your brain for trading, right? So you need to prepare yourself enough to be at your baseline, okay? And then you need to activate your brain for trading, right? And that is done with your cue. So you're cueing yourself that you're about to trade and you're about to start that mindset where you need to shut off your emotions. So you've prepared your ability to have that, and then you activate what you're preparing. And then this third step is you have to protect steps 1 and 2. And that is done by set and forget, right? So to revisit, you need to prepare your baseline state as the person that you are. You need to ensure that you are at your baseline of regulation. Step 2, you need to activate the part of your brain that understands that trading is different from everyday life and that it requires different things from you. And then step 3 is the part where you're actually going to protect the trade and the money and yourself from even being opened up to the possibility that it can fail because of you. If you are able to achieve your baseline and you actually follow these 3 steps, or even just implement this, not necessarily as a protocol, but just ingrain it into you, then you will find success and you will find results at least better than what you were already doing if psychology is your issue. Because this right here will clear up a big majority of psychology issues in trading.